Okay, first, what I want to do is establish what I believe depression to be. And it's basically an inward spiral of compounding and inward folding energy without outlet. And so it can be energy spent to suppress, but then not come back and digest and release. So it's suppression upon suppression upon suppression. It can be a spiral into various endless loops, often created through cultural ignorance, where something pisses you off, but the culture says ignorance is bad. So you don't transform the thing that's pissing you off, which means it stays there and pisses you off again. And then the culture says it's bad, so you deal with a growing amount of energy called anger, but then more and more energy gets consumed to bottle the anger as opposed to transform the outer reality. So that it's an inward folding cycle. And there are a couple of different, in my inward, folding cycle, there are a couple of different points that all lead towards depression. The first one is sensitivity. In the neurological map of the species, there's roughly 10% of the population that has an uncommon level of reactivity or responsiveness or sensitivity, the synonyms, to external and emotional experiences. Now, this is at odds with the other 80 or 90%, which have a different sensitivity set point. You can think of it in terms of a microphone. If someone has a microphone that is set to 10 on the volume amplifier, and another person has a microphone that's set to 2, the chance of a reverb, screal, that scream that develops when sound escalates and escalates because it's at a high setting relative to the amplification around it, is very high. And what this does is it generally means that this invisible minority or this shamed minority of uncommonly sensitive people get into that type of reverb scream, maybe 3 times easier than other people, or with 3 times less stimulation. And the result of that is a fear of the scream, of the pain that gets involved with those those loops, which leads to conflict aversion. So as a teenager, and growing up, not raising my voice, not fighting anyone, not getting into fist fights, but also having a lot of fear around aggression. I would also say that at some point I learned that both spiritually and culturally, aggression was bad, and that bad men, did this. And so the problem with that is that the invisibility framework within our culture does not build a culture for the minority of highly sensitive people. It builds a culture for the majority that have a much lower stimulation or a much higher stimulation threshold. So at a point where it might be a bit loud for a sensitive person, maybe a normal person is feeling like let's kind of pump up the party a little bit to get out of boredom and into engagement. And this stimulation threshold is a very important thing to understand. It's not understood in any scientific and intelligent way within our culture. As a result, the minority of which I'm a part is systemically violated at the stimulation level. And because it's an invisible violation, there's no apology or repair. And when a minority pipes up about it, then there's backlash from the majority because there is a tension. Every single person has a point on the stimulation continuum where at the bottom it's boring and at the top it's painfully overwhelming. But that point is different for each person. The neurologically highly sensitive people have a much lower threshold at which it's very interesting. A highly sensitive person can be overwhelmed by their own imagination, something that I'm, grapple with at times, and, can talk for hours with stick figures and stuff, and in their own world, it's very loud for them. They're not bored. The way someone else needs a heavy metal rock band just to wake them up and make them feel alive. And so this is the first spiral. An insensitive, violating stimulation threshold in 80% of the culture, which, when you're already at stimulation overload, the last thing you want to do is get into a fight, which increases the stimulation, which brings it into pain point for the highly sensitive person, not so much for other people. And the problem with that is it leads to a continual dynamic of aggression, aversion, suppression, and withdrawal. And so I've practiced that pattern my whole life. People reward me for withdrawing quietly from environments that don't work. They punish me for asking for modification of the environment to a point that is comfortable for me. So this is the first chronic source of depression. The second is invisibility. As someone that's worked on myself and is not fitting into the stereotype of a guy, I am continually met with projections of who I am and who I am supposed to be that are A, wildly inaccurate, B, not checked out, C, not checked out that they're not checked out, and that cycle is an endless process that's basically saying you don't exist, and because you don't exist, we don't need to check in and see if you exist or not, because we know who you are. You're a guy. And so, in just lots of little ways, this comes up. And that is, an ongoing daily frustration in relationship. There's also the fact that the somewhat Asperger's type, the way that I've dealt with the combination of chauvinism, of shaming men for being reactive and emotional, and the fact that I'm highly emotional, which was drilled in deeply by my father's humiliation protocols, in which he tormented any display of emotion, was that there's a facade. I can be, for example, right now in 4 out of 10 pain and hurt. My belly can be hurting. I can be in 4 out of 10 grief right now. Anxiety, a certain sense of shame that this is not being dealt with effectively by me or anyone around me. The sense of frustration, a sense of invisibility. All of this is going on. And this face doesn't reveal a lot of that tenderness and vulnerability. This face is, quite an effort to assert my voice. But there's a continual message inside saying, be quiet, let them have their projections, please them by being the people, being the person that they want you to be, and the loneliness of that. And so this tension between wanting to be visible, wanting to heal that loneliness, and not wanting to deal with the fear and aggression of other people who like to see the world in very simple terms, and I'm a boat rocker in that dynamic. And so there's how much to rock the boat, basically, is a continual thing, because if I rocked it fully, the whole culture would be upside down, because I see an incredibly upside down culture. And that brings up another point of invisibility. My compromise, which is about an 80% compromise in this culture, is other people's outrageous invasion. And so when I take my ideal world and say, well, these guys don't understand sensitivity, they don't understand chauvinism, they don't understand, who I am as opposed to their sense of projection. And they don't have time to learn it right now. So let me scale down the way I'd like to interact 80%. This 80% is met with the opinion that I'm just have no boundaries. Like, gee, he just asks for whatever he wants, and oh my goodness, how could he speak up about that? Nobody speaks up about this, and so I'm left with this sense that you haven't even bothered to understand how much I'm compromising. But on the other hand, I know exactly how much you're compromising, 20%. You're in your little comfortable norm that this culture populates and produces, and I'm asking for a 20% deviation from that norm, which is 80%, less than optimal for me. And the message that that's too much is a constant message you shouldn't be existing. Why? Because the majority is comfortable, like this, and any deviation from that is just, oh my goodness, it's too much. Someone asked how you're doing, you actually tell them, oh my goodness, what's the world coming to? And so we have an invisibility and this mild sense of degraded esteem that, partly out of fear and the conflict aversion protocol, I'm barely existing. And that barely existing is too much for a lot of people. And the message is kind of like, if you could just die and disappear, we would all be so comfortable in our status quo with nobody piping up about its absurdity. And so this is another pain, invisibility, and depression point, because nobody wants to hear about this either. Nobody wants to hear that I'm only asking them to compromise 20%. No one wants to hear that there's a whole nother possible world out there. No one wants to hear the mathematics behind that and how absurd so much of our culture is. Nobody wants to hear any of that. They just want that 20% to go away. The next thing is unsustainable systems. So I'm in pain a lot, and the natural healthy thing is to transform the world around to be in less pain. And that takes, of course, energy. And so I spend energy and I do the math. And I understand that, I remember one girlfriend who had a particularly hard time accepting that I existed. And she thought I was completely unreasonable. And after 6 months of patiently letting her overstimulate me, mostly doing this and this and this, after 6 months of teaching her and being nice to her, she finally said, I agree with you. I now see you. After 6 months of torment and this and that and the other, I agree with you. You're right. I was wrong. You're not just a guy who's always interested in sex. You're not this. You're not that. Now, you're actually a unique human being. Amazing. 6 months. But I'm still not going to give you all that you want. I'm going to give you empathy that you can't get what you want with me or with anyone else. And I'm still somewhat of a mind that even though I agree with you, because you're a minority, you should change. Well, I do the math, and I say 6 months of my time, 256 emotional bruises, having to hold my tongue when she's completely out to lunch, but is too out to lunch to understand that she's out to lunch. She doesn't know that she doesn't know, so she's going to be uppity. That I grasp that before she does. Why? Because I've done it before. I've done it with this person. I've done it with, and I think, okay. So at the end of 6 months of investment, is what's coming back into my world in terms of nourishing energy, empathy, human needs, etc., replenishing the reserves that it takes to store up to give out 6 months of patience and empathy in it. And so often, it's not a very sustainable model. It would be kind of like a customer that takes $200,000 to win over. So now they're going to buy your product for a lower price than the competitor. Now, you told them on the first visit, here's our product, it's a great product, and you can save $2 per tire. Every tire we sell you will be $2 cheaper, and it's a better tire. And they say, no, we need proof. And so you do this, and you keep visiting them. And so $200,000 later, they say, you're right. We'll buy your tire for $2 less. Thank you so much for investing $200,000 to win us over, because we're a very valuable customer. You look at the profit lines, and you realize it's going to take 10 years for this person to pay back the $200,000 in invested outlay, if you follow that analogy. And they're in no hurry. They haven't invested $200,000. And this is an algorithm that I've met time and time again in this culture. Whether it's with women, whether it's with clients, whether it's with friends, male friends, trying to start friendships with 40 men and noticing that every single one of those men put less into the relationship than I did indefinitely. And we're quite happy with that. They weren't complaining. They enjoyed me putting in 2 or 3 times as much energy. I was complaining because it was a mediocre relationship relative to what it could be. Well, that's infuriating. When an entire populace is satisfied with intense mediocrity, with no conception of excellence, and if they do have a sense of excellence, their attitude is, well, maybe, if it is meant to be, I will enjoy it. Meaning, if a great relationship comes along, if one day we wake up and we're close buds and we have this deep, meaningful love for each other, and it just happens without me investing much time, without me telling the truth, without me returning phone call, it just happens. I'd be delighted. But the idea that I should get off my butt and actually pick up the phone and have a 3-hour conversation that has a reasonable odds, focusing on topics that could deliver that kind of mental, emotional state, that's a little bit beyond me. I'm just waiting for it to happen. And it's happening. You're an amazing male friend, Dane. Because what? I do all the work. And it's like, okay, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, get rid of it. And there's no one left. There's no one left. Well, it was nice for them while it lasted. But it's draining. And there's anger about that. The stupidity that doesn't grasp a co-creative venture. I mean, would we put up with employees where one employee shows up and looks out the window and then the other employee shows up and works 16-hour days, and then we just say, well, this is a partnership? Of course not. But this is the default kind of vague, unthought out. I mean, it's too much work to think it out. This is the vague backdrop in attitude. I got sick of the amount of, oh, I was just going to call you. I haven't had contact with any of these men in 5 years. I reached out to one of them. He was just thinking of me. Didn't, of course, pick up the phone to express what he was thinking and said, but, they're right there about to call when they could get around to it. Sometime in the next 25 years, about to call. And so there's unsustainable systems. Now, the same is true in government. I get an absolutely absurd bill from my county. They spend more money producing the bill than they're going to get for paying it. It doesn't matter to them. I write to them and suggest an alternate system. They can't even write back. So we have a most bizarre manufacturing of homelessness in my town. The town is producing more and more homeless people every year. Is that a good business model? I mean, would banks loan money to a business that was going deeper and deeper into the red every single year? It doesn't even occur to them that something needs to change. And it's too much trouble to think. So you give them detailed analysis. What's your plan? This is my plan. Oh my goodness, someone's thinking. We can't have that. Let's just all clam up and ignore the emails. And it's, again, absolutely, absurd. So unsustainable systems, combined with the fact that nobody wants to rock the boat. It's like people aren't saying, gee, that's fucked up, let's change something around, thanks for bringing it to our attention. No, it's, what do you expect? Bureaucratic local governments. It's like, what do we expect? Crappy relationships, unhappy, depressed people, dysfunctional governments, and it's just fine? So that, they're, again, unsustainable systems. Now, the other kind of vortex around this, which you've probably picked up on, is pain. Pain, unhealed and unresponded to, leads to impatience, anger, and irritability. That's normal, by the way. That's healthy. That's your psyche saying, this is not very good for you. So you notice you feel irritable, you feel angry. However, when you have a cultural blockade of judgment and fear of feelings in general, but anger more so, you then have pain leads to irritation. Irritation leads to rejection. That's an angry person. Get away from here. Irritation leads to rejection. Rejection leads to shame. Shame is the signal that we're falling outside of our pack. We're a pack mammalian species at one level. And monkeys know they survive longer when they're cooperating and welcome in the pack. They look out for each other. They give signals. They groom each other. They have sex together. The species of monkeys is more safe and more sustainable as a pack than as a lone monkey. That biology is in our system. And so when everyone is rejecting anyone, regardless of the intelligence of what is or is not being rejected, the rejected or marginalized individual feels shame. The awareness that I'm not meeting my need for love and belonging, and thus a core foundation of survival and security. Security in a cultural system is pegged to love and belonging. Rejection is the message. You are not welcome. You don't belong. So then there's shame. The shame undealt with and unprocessed, because this is a culture full of lies. You ask someone, you seem a bit irritated with me, what is it? They say, oh no, nothing. And then they just avoid you. You say, are you upset by this? No, it's fine. And then they avoid you. So with all this lying, you can't deal with the underlying equation in the underlying fear and emotional illiteracy, fear of feelings and emotional illiteracy. People just running from intensity right and left, which means they're running from key information that's affecting species survival. Who do you think a virus is going to attack? A wealthy person with health care or the homeless person living in their backyard? Of course, the virus enters the most vulnerable portion of the species, and then it spreads. So avoiding the issue, it doesn't make you safer. It makes you dumber and less safe. But this is not something that can be voiced. One of the healing aspects of what is, on one level, an incredible, unsustainable media project, because in my world, someone producing this series, A Growing Human, is contributing knowledge and expertise that is significantly more valuable than watching Netflix or whatever, or running a paper route, or any number of things that we reward quite well in our culture. But this kind of stuff doesn't get rewarded. And so this gives me a place to release some of the depression of inward turning spirals. But in my idea of a healthy world, any individual who can articulate disease and solutions is automatically elevated, regardless of their coolness factor, regardless of their wealth, background, race, or sex. They're elevated because this is the data that the cult needs to grow rather than wither, than run off a cliff. But cults that are fearful of change and the unknown do just the opposite. They punish the outliers through shame and rejection, which then leads right back to pain. So this is an endless loop. Back to pain, more irritation, more rejection, more shame, and more pain. It's difficult to break out of that without a certain degree of cooperation. And therapists are very helpful in this regard. They say, well, don't tell people about your anger about this, and don't. In other words, if you will just be silent like everyone else, you too can fit into an emotionally numb and dysfunctional culture that doesn't know how to deal with feelings, and the world will merrily go on without anyone understanding who you are, because you've fitten in. You fit in nicely by invisibility. That is a maddening answer, to know that therapists are telling millions of people to all hide the truth from everyone else and racking up large sums of money for doing so. Next we come to immaturity. Somewhere in the trauma of being unable to bond with either parent emotionally, with being unable to develop emotional healthy regulation continuums with human beings as a result of that on-off switch with no practice. Somewhere in the trauma of violence, of shame, of screams, of threats, of psychological abuse, of physical abuse, parts of me shut down at different ages. And so if I want to find me, I have to go back to 5 years old. Now there's a 5-year-old in me that loves to be cuddled and pampered and pleased. And that's how I feel. I feel 5 years old. And when I'm scared and I feel 5 years old, I want someone to hug and help me relax. I want someone to touch my head. I want someone to praise me and tell me that I'm lovable. I want to be treated like a 5-year-old because emotionally I'm 5 years old. That's where I dissociated from that particular part that knows how to receive love and affection. Now, rationally, I can say, okay, well, that's what's there. So let me ask for that. Let me ask someone to give me a warm hug and cuddle me and roll around on the floor. It works. Except that this cult is filled with judgments about that. That's childish. I wasn't asking if it was childish. I asked if you would give me love in the format that this part of me knows how to receive it. Well, it shouldn't be that way. I didn't ask if it should or shouldn't be there. I didn't ask if I should or shouldn't have been abused and regressed and stuck at different ages. Nobody asked, nobody came over to tell my parents they shouldn't be traumatizing me. So why are you telling me that I shouldn't be traumatized? It's a little bit dysfunctional, a little bit of sloppy math in there. It's rampant. So there's this part of me that, feels 12 years old, and this part of me that feels 2 years old, and this part of me that feels 5 years old, and there's a whole world that hates those parts in themselves. Most of the people are dealing with it because the abuse is in no way singled out for my benefit. They hate those regressed parts in themselves. They work hard to suppress them, and they can't stand it when anyone else expresses the liberty of being truthful about those immature parts. And so then they heap all the judgments and control that they do on themselves onto anyone with the audacity to tell the truth, which then means that when I most need an innocent hug or something, you're a creep, you're weird, you're this. I didn't need to be told I was a creep and be weird. I needed to be hugged. Well, that's not normal. Figure out, you're an adult now. It's like, I know how boring I'm supposed to be. I know how idiotically I'm supposed to behave as a Western grown-up. That doesn't mean that that's intelligent. It may be a step in the right direction to just unveil the amount of undigested energy, the amount of traumatized and regressed personas in there that are desperately trying to have interaction at the level they are capable of. And without having an adult for a parent. My mother was a regressed 4-year-old. My father was a petulant, enraged 6 years old. Without having an adult in the family, in a relative state of isolation, surrounded by people I can't say, oh, that was a really mature person. Without having an adult, how do you actually learn to internalize what it's like to be an adult, other than to be serious and pompous and lie and suppress all kinds of things to fit in? So there's a lot of immaturity that has plenty of outlets. And this is where a dog, by the way, is incredibly helpful, because people are useless as a general rule in our culture. In other cultures, it's much more free, and I love that. That's one of the things I love about Thailand or some parts of the Philippines, etc. There's not all this idea of who you should be. It's like, my goodness, I actually get to be the person I am without causing endless trouble. Because if I want love and affection, and every time I express that, everyone says how immature that is and withholds it, now I just want love and affection, plus I want healing for all that judgment and rejection. It's no movement forward. It's an absurd level of maturity within the culture. So an immature culture produces immature parents that produce immature children who grow up and become immature grown-ups. And it just goes on with this endless cycle of upmanship, who's pretending to be the best critical parent, in the dynamic. So this is irritating as hell, because there are parts of me that know exactly how they want to be loved. And I may say that's a pretty young part of me. Fine, it is. But it knows exactly how it wants to be loved. I don't, as this old part. It's like that wasn't modeled. Immaturity was modeled. Maturity, not so much. I don't want to become some of the numb, sociopathic people that can discuss world pains, etc., without crying, who can discuss things endlessly without even doing anything. Stuff isn't integrating in our culture. You're considered intelligent if you can talk about bizarre ideas and do nothing about it. You might be better off dumb than wasting everyone's time with all these ideas that aren't being acted on. And so that's a depression point. Because you can't tell this culture that it may be better to be honestly immature and deal with it than it is to be suppressed immature and isolated and emotionally, mentally diseased, of which 20% of Americans are. Then we have the issue of scale. Anytime I'm in a group dynamic or dealing with a group, I'm one against many. I get worn down, back to the unsustainable systems. The group can always wear a change person down unless they are fanatical. But the group punishes and labels people as fanatics. So you either get worn down and fit in and accept that the thing just never changes, or you get labeled a fanatic and shamed and ostracized for being a fanatic, and you do facilitate change at the price of pissing everyone off, which they take out on the individual. They never take it out on the cult. They never say, you're right. What a burden we put on you. You have to become absolutely fanatical just to get our attention. We're so numb and out of touch. What a burden we put on our fanatics. Why don't we give them a hand so that they can de-escalate and understand that change will happen without their Herculean effort, that they actually have some support? But instead, there's this scale dynamic. So this is inward, 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 10 fucking thousand times. That's depression. It's exhaustion. It's tiring. It's filled with too much grief to feel. So that's the way in. And 20% of Americans are depressed. So what to do about it? What remedy? What have I found that actually has some work here? Well, one thing is personal space for uniqueness. Now, one of the important things, given the amount of exhaustion that I feel dealing with all of this, is it's really important to make creating and doing things effortless. And so I put a lot of energy into creating systems that create lots of movement with minimal time and effort. So that's one thing. And that comes together with personal space. Having a whole house to myself, I can go and lay down and sleep when I want to sleep and not have someone thumping around upstairs. I can, if I can't sleep, I can go up and study something without someone saying, why are you listening to something at 3 a.m? And so personal space is one response to setting up systems. The system of making this video is an example. I have one switch that turns on 8 lights. I sit down in this chair. I write something on this blackboard, and I take off the shirt that has food stains on it. And I press record. There's still some friction there. But if it's, hire a lighting crew, schedule it for next Tuesday, get edit, then I don't edit it. My assistant does that. And so it's at a level where I can speak and feel that I'm not more drained at the end than I was at the beginning. And so that's, a system. Then there's art and poetry. Writing thousands of poems, drawing things in the abstract. Abstract is my favorite because what you need to do to break out of depression is you need to break rules. The rule says you've got to be sustainable, and this isn't sustainable here, and that isn't sustainable here, and that isn't. Fuck sustainability. I'm going to exist. The rule says you have to make an appointment to be angry. Fuck that. I'm angry. The rule says that you shouldn't be angry. Fuck that, I'm angry. The rule says. So to get out of depression, it's just burning up all the layers of resistance and fear and anxiety to existing at a very core level. So abstract art, fuck getting the lines and the shadows right. Paint something. Paint a wall. Well, let's paint a 10-foot painting. Let's do this. And then stick it on the garage wall. Nobody's doing that in the neighborhood. I don't care. Let's get something out there. So we have art, we have poetry, we have personal space. We have goals. Goals help push me through that anxiety of worrying what other people think. It's on my list. I'm going to do it. Yes, it makes me uncomfortable, but at least I'll get something done. Singular focus is part of that goals. Again, to push through all that empathy. What if so-and-so didn't like this? What if the neighbor was upset by this? What if? Singular focus charges through those with those what ifs and gives space to existing. Now, it's true that there's a counterphobic dynamic, meaning the constant fear and anxiety of what everyone feels and how this will have this ripple effect or that ripple effect. Maybe the landlord won't like the 9-foot painting on the garage. Oh my goodness, what should we do? Put it up there and see what happens. There's a counterphobic, like I've got to get out of this thing, but and that makes it less regulated. So it's too suppressed, and then it's reactively counterphobic, which means I can sometimes go over the edge, which then brings up rebellion in people around me, etc., which then adds to the fear, what if, which then leads to more counterphobic, I've got to get out of this constant fear dynamic. Being unreasonable is, I would say, a really important part of this, because nothing that I do that's healthy, as far as I can tell, is reasonable within our culture. Why am I making it my business to solve homelessness in my town? It's not a reasonable thing. No one's encouraged me to do that. I don't see anyone doing that. It's not reasonable. Who gives a shit? I don't like seeing the same homeless faces day after day without having any clue what's going on. Let's do something. So being unreasonable. Speaking. Whether it's to people I'm talking to, this is my way of talking. And it is very unreasonable according to, to feedback. Speaking. Meditation brings in other realities, and I acknowledge them as real. Meaning, it's in the world of probability fields and probable realities. What you imagine is just what's going on in another reality other than this one. And in that reality, things may be much more intelligent than this one. If you're imagining people being empathic, if you're imagining people addressing homelessness, if you're imagining money being spent on ecological issues, the probable reality may be more intelligent than this reality, in which case you can learn from interacting, and so meditation. There's also healing. In this world, nobody apologizes for running me around endlessly in this way and that way and, whatever. And I'd love to have an apology. It just doesn't show up most of the time. Most of the time, I have to spend more energy. Like, it might take me an hour to help someone understand why they owe me a 10-minute apology. That may owe me a 1-minute apology. But I have to spend an hour to get them to grasp that parts of me exist that don't exist in their paradigm, but they actually exist. They're in my body. I feel them, da-da-da-da-da. They exist. They're just being blockaded in the cultural status quo as non-existent. So they're not being acknowledged. They're not being honored, so they're being violated. So now I have to educate someone about where they don't know, so they can give me a 1-minute apology. Well, I may be exhausted after 1 hour of watching them on the edge of fuming and storming out, because nobody likes hearing in this culture what they don't know. People don't like it. Well, we're ignorant to the hilt, and we're ignorant about what we're ignorant about. And we don't like hearing about it. And so, well, what else is there to do? You won't study it on your own. You won't learn anything intelligent on your own. So how are you going to know everything? Well, I do know everything. I know how to hit a golf ball. Wow, that's an incredibly important species survival skill. Yes, I'm not asking about that. I'm asking if you know how to affect someone's stomach with your tone of voice. You never heard of that idea, I see. And you never heard that you didn't hear either, I see. So what exactly is the burden you're placing on anyone who knows something useful? So, so we have meditation and therapy. Therapists love listening to this. They just sit there taking the odd note. Yes, very true, very true, very true. Pay me $150. I'll see you next week. These are very interesting conversations. Well, are they doing anything about it? Are they writing to City Hall or writing to other therapists to say we've got a fucked up culture, maybe we should be doing something with this information rather than just charging people to sit and tell us, the only people that aren't involved in their lives? No. And that was somewhat fine with me until I got sexually abused by a therapist. And then had to hire other therapists to sit and listen. Oh, very interesting. Oh, very interesting. It's like, you could give a shit. You're not going to do anything to protect your own industry. Maybe talking to a passive listener for thousands of hours is overrated. And so therapy at least gets it out. It's not the most satisfying because the therapist is not going to tell anyone. That's their great promise, right? We will not tell anyone who you are and what you want and what you feel. You will be completely invisible after this session. Your anonymity and confidentiality is secure with me. Well, another way of saying that is you're too fucking cowardly to do anything. You're not going to come and meet my wife or talk with this person or get this person to develop emotionally. You're just going to collect your check for doing absolutely nothing. And so then we have diary. I do something. That was my whole system of diary. This is what happened. This is what I think about what happened. This is what I feel about what happened. And this is what I'm going to do about it. And then do it. So that was, quite satisfying. Bucket list. Let's just do everything on my list. That was a year's work. Write the books, go on the vacations, buy the items, fill the house with plants, do all the things. I want this. Okay, I want this before I die. Let's do it all in 1 year. So get it all done. So impatience is, I guess, one of the responses in this. Fuck all this. I want something now. Impatience is a symptom of pain, but it's also in that sense a symptom of things just being bogged down. When you're in a depressive type of pain where things are folding in on each other endlessly, then the response to folding in endlessly is to cut through red tape in your own mind. You think the government is filled with shitty red tape? It is. But what's the government a representative of? It's an archetypal symbol of the human ego with all of its fears and red tapes. I can't do this on a Sunday. I can't. Who said? Well, they'll get mad at me. So you've got an internalized government that is reeking with bureaucratic nonsense and red tape. And so every time I get pissed with Washington, I try and find some stupid red tape in my own head of why I'm not doing something intelligent. Because that's not the way it's done. Says who? I'm the boss. I'm the government in here. So let's paint the walls. Let's do this. Let's sing to people. Let's talk. Let's tell the truth for once. And cut through the red tape that says that's not the protocol. Psychedelics, psilocybin, DMT, LSD, things of that nature dissolve red tape in the psyche. And so to that extent, as boundaries dissolve, energy is liberated to some extent. Now there's a whole caveat to that, and there's a whole period of ways and times in which psychedelics can be incredibly dangerous and destructive, used in the in the wrong situation. But for depression in particular, where everything can't move because there's all these regulations, what a psychedelic does is it lifts you into a state where temporarily those regulations either don't exist or you realize that they're utter nonsense. And if you realize they're utter nonsense and they don't exist, you get windows like, how would an intelligent, healthy individual who arrived new on the planet today, how might they behave before they got sucked into all the corrupt rigmarole of our cult? And you say, maybe I'll do a few of those things. And often good things happen. Travel is another breakthrough in depression. We can't do this. We can't let you pay your bill without you identifying yourself, because strangers might, with malicious intent, pay your bill. Oh my goodness, that would be terrible. If you don't have the 10-digit PIN, we can't possibly let you pay your bill. We'll keep sending it to you, of course, to pay, but we can't let you pay it. I hope you understand, we've got to protect your identity. It's like, please don't. Please let strangers pay my bill. No, we couldn't do it. When you're surrounded with so much stupidity, and you just go to another cult, they have their own stupidity, but it's not yours. It's another cult's stupidity. And so you go halfway around the world, and of course you can pay your bill. Cash is preferred. We'll come bicycle to your door to get it. Wonderful, wonderful, and surprise, surprise, you actually recognize my face. I'm the one who rented the apartment. Well, you don't need a PIN number? My goodness. What is the world coming to when you can recognize a human being from their face and voice and body disposition? Amazing. And so you realize, they have their stupidities, and oh my gosh, you can't hold hands in public. What? Yes. They don't need PIN numbers, but you can't hold hands in public. Or men who are kind to one another must be shot. Men who go to war must be lionized, and heroified. So, I see. You've got it all backwards there. I see. But it's not my kind of backwards. I can be out of the shit of my cult in a little bit of refreshed, divergent insanity. And then there are some cultures that are far less depressive and structured than ours. They tend to be temperate and warm cultures. And so I am instantly 300% happier in Thailand. It's wonderful. I felt that since the first hour I arrived 8 years ago, and I've spent, years there since. It's an amazing place as an antidote to bureaucratic stupidity. It's an antidote to America in many ways. And so we have psychedelics, travel, meditation. These are all travels outside of one's set. And then, of course, you have sci-fi. You've got going into sci-fi terrain is fabulous for depression, because you realize, there are other consciousnesses out there in probable universes and in actual universes separate from ours in different planets. You realize, oh my goodness, not everyone is stuck where we are. And so these are my antidotes. And my dog, of course, is intelligent. He loves affection. He likes being close by. He likes playing, and he doesn't care what he looks like. Lovely. Dogs are way more intelligent for healing depression than people, because they are not interested in all the rules. There's none of this, I see, with 10,000 judgments behind that eye gaze and stuff. Dog just happy to see you. So dogs are great. Then we have nature is, in general, more intelligent than human beings when it comes to getting out of depression. In different, hot water, cold water, immersion in different, physical, biologically structured things. Nature doesn't say every pebble has to be exactly the same, otherwise you don't meet quota. No, every pebble is different. It's wonderful. And so, being in nature breaks that. And then children are fabulous before they've been corrupted, because they're not interested in anything than having a good time. And if we were not interested in having anything other than a good time, and were not punished for our unique expressions of that, there would be no depression. It's no fun to be depressed. It takes tons of energy to feel worse. And we breed that right and left because we're dysfunctional as a cult. We're not dysfunctional at birth, but by the time the cult has gotten its little claws into us and whipped us and shamed us 10,000 times every time we've been unique, we find ourselves lost in the same dark prison that it finds itself, at every level of the hierarchy. So my way out of depression is to actively and somewhat rebelliously move in these things. I will shake my body. I will dance. I will stomp my feet to get blood moving. Anything that's unusual that breaks with, basically you want to break taboos if you're in depression, because if you weren't saddled with unconscionable, burdenous taboos, you wouldn't be, like that, unburdenous. It's, burdenous. It's a new word. Fuck it. Invent it. That's how language evolves. Create things. Make a new form of art. Jump up and down. Listen to loud music. Go out shopping in your pajamas. It's a great remedy, by the way. Go shopping in your pajamas. You will find your depression goes down. Male or female, it does no one any harm. You're not exposing the most beautiful parts of your body. Heaven forbid. You're not exposing but people will look, oh my gosh, are those pajamas? Yes, they are. They're comfortable. Deal with it. And you come out mildly less depressed because you actually did something intelligent against the rules. So, of course, children dealing with this constant shaming and you're not good enough and you're not, do their own acting out, but then we punish them back into, shame and depression until they're as miserable as we are. But, rebelling, great, fabulous. Do it somewhat responsibly. Pajamas are not illegal. You're not going to, waste more taxpayer money incarcerating more human beings. The biggest crime of all, someone stole some gum. Oh, let's spend $80,000 a year of taxpayer money putting them in a concrete box. That'll teach them how dumb we are as a cult and why we need to be violated. So, of course, humor, spoofy things, Jim Carrey's type of stuff. Sophisticated, intelligent people aren't supposed to enjoy Dumb and Dumber. That's exactly what makes it so much fun. Or suicide movies, where people try to commit suicide in various ways, and everyone tries to capture them so they don't escape their misery. That's a great relief. Carefully thinking suicide through and planning it is in itself a relief because it's against the law. So you feel better just figuring it all out. And so these are all general things that have one thing in common: rebellion against the inane minutiae that we use to burden ourselves from great beings, great consciousness, and great divinities into scared, worthless, shame-based rocks who can't do anything right. And I'll leave you with that thought. And I give you my permission, by the way, to break all the rules without hurting anyone. And remind that breaking all the rules without hurting anyone is actually helping a great number of people. Because I've noticed depressed people around me going away with a little bit more hope. They don't necessarily go shopping in their pajamas, but they just the thought that they could is enough to cheer them up for a few hours. Take care.